to the Akron and Macon, be recovered, put up in their hangar, and if enemy airplanes try to attack the two airships, they would launch fighter planes, Sparrowhawks, the same way to engage and shoot down the enemy fighters.
To fulfill the role of scout plane and defensive fighter, the Curtiss Wright Sparrowhawk was selected. Chosen primarily for its small size, the Sparrowhawk, unremarkable as a carrier-based plane, seemed well suited to the giant airships. Supported above by a crane, they could be lowered one by one through an opening in the bottom of the hull, and from there, launched into the air. Like an aircraft carrier, the airship would turn into the wind, and the tiny planes would rev their engines as they hung from a metal bar called the trapeze. Barely above stall speed, they would drop when released until they gained sufficient lift to fly their mission. Recovery was the reverse procedure as they flew up to meet the airship. Problems cropped up from time to time and were handled with typical Navy ingenuity. The system was meant to be practical, not elegant.
When the airship took off from Moffett, what would happen is the planes would stay on the ground and wait till the airship got up to a certain elevation and then fly off from Moffett and then attach up onto the mothership. And at that stage, the crew would take the landing gear off the aircraft and attach extra fuel tanks to the Sparrowhawks to increase their scouting range. At that stage, the Sparrowhawks were pretty much committed to landing back on the Macon because they had no other place to land.
For the first few months of 1933, the Akron was busy with fleet maneuvers and public relations flights. If there was a desperate pace to the schedule, it may have been because the Navy had spent big on its new airships and Congress wanted to see results. Following 2 fleet exercises, the results were still inconclusive. The big airship was really more of an experimental test bed rather than a proven design, and once again, bad weather intervened. Cruising along the east coast on a clear April night, the Akron was overtaken by the worst storm of 1933. Her commanding officer fought long and hard to keep her aloft, but shortly after midnight, gusting wind forced her downward from an altitude of about 1,600 feet until her lower tail fin struck the water. Dropping ballast, she clawed for altitude, but the damage was done. The tail was held fast by the raging sea. Minutes later, the Akron broke up, and by the time rescuers arrived, 72 of 76 crew members were dead. It was a deadly scenario that would become hauntingly familiar to the U.S. Navy. Many of the best airshipmen died in the Akron accident, including a staunch supporter of the program, Rear Admiral William A. Moffett, the head of the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics. Only the Macon remained to carry on the case for rigid airships. There was no margin for error, no time for mistakes. She immediately began a series of long-range continental crossings, public relations flights, and fleet exercises. While skepticism in official circles began to cloud the future of the Naval Airship Division, the Macon continued to perform. But in April of 1934, on her way to Florida, the airship was flying over a mountainous region of Texas when she was struck by a gust of wind. This caused damage to a rear fin mount, exposing a weakness which would later prove fatal. Operating off the coast of California, the Macon participated in extensive fleet exercises in February of 1935. The big ship had scored a number of successes against the simulated opponent, and spirits were high. With her 4 scout planes secured in her belly, Macon made a wide turn and headed north to her home at Moffett Field in Sunnyvale, California.
Back on February 12, 1935, when the Macon was trying to reach Moffett Field, they were a few miles from the coastline, and there was a moderate storm off the coast that they were running into. When they started having problems with steering the ship, they deduced that they were losing lift in 2 helium cells. At that stage, the captain decided to start a series of maneuvers to try and stabilize the ship. One of them was to drop some ballast because he lost his lift. So the crew was ordered to drop some ballast. They tried to use the dynamic lift of the propellers, and they were configured to try and steer the ship vertically.
As the Macon rose above her service ceiling, she began to bleed precious helium. Losing lift, she fell towards the sea, and Commander Wiley ordered the crew forward to prepare to abandon ship. As the ship foundered, the distress calls alerted the nearby fleet, including the cruiser USS Louisville. The radio transcriptions still sound urgent some 60 years later.
Following from the Macon, quote, falling, unquote. All ships turn on searchlights and cover assigned sectors. Do not set off rockets or flares. Report direct to the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet when survivors are picked up. It's always rough off point, sir, but it was really rough that day. And all I could think about, those guys falling in the sea, they haven't got a chance.
The Navy ships picked up 81 of the 83 crew members, but as the Macon slipped slowly beneath the waves, it signaled the end of the rigid airship in the United States.